Hello, everybody, and welcome to our event today about writing in the second half of life. Before I introduce our three speakers today, Eric already did it. I kindly ask you to, if you haven't done so, mute your audio. And once we start, please also turn off the video. The presenters would actually prefer that. So our women poets will first do a reading of their works, and this will be followed by a round table, and they will discuss questions surrounding writing in the second half of life. Questions for our women poets can be asked, and hopefully, or we would hope you would put them in the chat box so we can answer them and after the performance. And and then what else do we have here? Yeah, I mean, I think the important thing, the presentation of our three women poets. So the first one is, let me see here, I don't know that by heart, so I made some notes. Joanne Rocky Delaplaine. Joanne Rocky Delaplaine's first poetry book, The Local World, was published in 2019 and was awarded one of the top 10 poetry books for 2019 by Beltway Poetry Quarterly. Her poems have appeared in Poet Lore, Ekphrastic Review, Tinderbox, and elsewhere. Her poems have won Best of the Net 2014, first place in the Bethesda Literary Festival Poetry Contest 2014, and first place in the Northern Virginia Review Contest 2013. She recently relocated from Maryland to California, and she lives in Oakland. She comes late to poetry, publishing her first book of poems at age 66. In addition to writing poems, she has taught Iyengar yoga for 30 years with a specialty in back care. She is the mother of a 23-year-old daughter, a longtime political activist, and a member with Nancy Meyer of a 27-year-long women's leadership collaborative. She had the great fortune to meet Yeva Johnson a few years ago at the Bread Loaf Writers Conference in Sicily. This is Joanne Rocky Delaplaine. Yeva Johnson, our second woman poet, is a Pushcart Prize nominated poet, musician, and physician whose work appears or is forthcoming in the Bellingham Review, Femme Literati Mixtape 2 Anthology, Sinister Wisdom, and elsewhere. Yeva recently had a poem published online for the San Francisco Public Library Poem of the Day series, curated by San Francisco's Poet Laureate. Her poems explore interlocking caste systems, and she often reads her poems accompanied with flute music, which she will actually do today too. When not reading, writing, or revising poems, a practice started at age 49. Yeva works as a physician full-time in a large long-term care facility in San Francisco. Her two college-aged children, who are currently back in the Bay Area, just started to teach her how to navigate social media. She loves to cook, creating new dishes weekly from what she calls her pandemic pantry, meaning any food she can get her hands on. Yeva had the wonderful opportunity to meet Rocky Delaplaine at the Bread Loaf Writers Conference in Sicily in 2017, and through Rocky to meet Nancy Meyer, now a mutual friend, for the benefit of creating this joint reading for Ashby Village. And last but definitely not least, the third woman poet, Nancy Meyer. Nancy started writing in her 50s. Her impulse was self-exploration, dream work, and the discipline of journaling. She found the poetry home she needed, a group that met weekly for over 20 years, mostly women, many English teachers, her patient and supportive coaches. Besides 60 journal publications, most recently Halfway Down the Stairs and the Stone Coast Review, 4 poems are forthcoming in the Sugar Hill Review and Sunlight Press. She's taking advantage of the COVID restrictions by researching and writing about her colonial Massachusetts ancestors and their role in our founding structures of white supremacy. Retired from a career in management development and women's leadership programs, Nancy has served on various theater and arts boards in the Bay Area and spent 10 years as an end-of-life counselor. She and her husband are avid bike riders and even more avid grandparents of 5, mostly teenagers now. A friend of Ashby Village member Irene Marcus since 1965, Nancy is delighted to join with her sisters, poets, and all of you for the street of poetry and talk. And now I think Nancy, Rocky, and Yeva take it from there.
Thank you, Sigrid and Irene and Eric and friends for joining us. I'm going to start with the poem that opens my book and recall some of my earliest memories. Let me just make sure I can work this. Okay. It's called The Local World. Now that I'm forgetting names, I'm remembering places, sounds, standing on a chalked hopscotch board with my mother, winning a cupcake when they holler 7. It happens again, and a third time, 3 cupcakes. I am 3. At 4, my sister shows me a rock behind our house. I call it my horse and ride it out of town whenever I hate the world. There was one on a hill at school, white quartz, too sharp to ride, but good for jumping from. Miss Schiller, my first grade teacher, will leave before the end of the year to have a baby. I march up to her desk when she hasn't returned from recess yet. Now, class, I say in my firmest voice, as if I know. You can sit down now, teacher, she laughs. How my cheeks warm, and this is called blushing. When you can't pronounce a word, cover it with your hand and say 1 syllable at a time. Her voice, an opening. Night, before I begin thinking wild hogs, the dark. Nay, she says, nay, like a horse's knicker. Then I can say it entire. Neighborhood. Oh, neighborhood, like this room. You, more breath inside me, moving. Neighborhood, neighborhood, neighborhood. I seem to have chosen today mostly books about poems that have to do with my motherhood and my relationship with my daughter. I came late to motherhood. I was 44 when my daughter was born, and this poem honors her birth. The letter O. O, your birth month, the full October moon, orange, rising behind oaks. O, the 15th letter, shown by Phoenicians with a dot in the middle, as if eyes. O, the mind waking. O, slashed, the mind oscillating just before sleep. O, on Oahu, hula dancers contain the sun. Oh, the primordial sound om as it begins in the back of the mouth. Oh, reading in high school the story of O, a woman who loses, reduces, subtracts herself to 0. Oh, my fear of such oblivion. Oh, with circumflex, my father's face when I didn't say sorry. Oh, abbreviations, old, ocean, Ohio, order, or. Oh, Ouroboros snake ends where she begins. Oh, a love cry, a grief cry, a word meaning these two are one. Oh, with umlaut, your saxophone hitting high E. Oh, the shape of your matted head pushing out of me. Oh, my os mirroring. Oh, your lips just before you took your first breath. Oh, what I called out when I rocked you, and our eyes were Phoenician. O's looking into O's. Oh, daughter. Oh, snow goose. Oh, no, gnome. My only O. This next poem describes a play at my daughter Olivia's theater camp, watching Romeo and Juliet. Tall oaks frame a makeshift stage. Families gather at River Bend Park on a warm August night to picnic and see their kids in a Shakespeare play. A half moon rises over the Potomac. The platform, 12 sheets of plywood propped on 2x4s. Staring at this pared down set, I think of a man I left long ago, a carpenter and home builder by trade. Why did I leave him exactly? At 60, he's the handsomest man I know, can still drive a nail through without hitting the wood. The night I left him, he howled as though his leg were caught in a steel trap. Never, I vowed, never again. And who is the one next to me now? Our daughter edging up a few rows to sit with friends. When the young lovers kiss, I envy their passion, but not their impatience. At intermission, the director reminds us, if they marry, it's a comedy. If they die, it's a tragedy. On the drive home, our 13-year-old wonders out loud, it's both, isn't it? Yes, I say, it's both. In this next poem, she's a bit older, she's 15, and we're driving from San Francisco to Seattle to get to a wedding, and we are terrified because we hit the redwoods and the mountains are full of smoke, and we can see the fires. This was about 5 years ago. Redwoods in a summer of drought. Do you have to sniff everything, my daughter says, pulling me from the blackberries. In late afternoon, we hike a trail through redwoods to Trillium Falls, where the water turns milky white as it pours down rocks. We're relieved to be out of the brush fires, smoke that dogged us on our drive north. At the base of the mountain, a bull elk gorges on summer grasses. Ravens fly to the banks of the Klamath River, and we follow them. That night, my daughter cries, allows me to hold her. She misses her friends, her phone, her town, her tethers. So many of the giant redwoods are hollowed at the base, lightning struck, charred inside, but at their tips, still leafing, green. We go to sleep thirsty and wake up smelling the ocean. From the last poem I'm going to read, and I thank you for your attention. I've asked Yeva to back me up on flute. It's my favorite way to present music with present poetry with music behind, and I'm honored she said yes. This is called Patawomek. You ready, Yeva?
I'm ready.
Okay. Goodbye, yellow galoshes from the Sears catalog, and brown rubbers I wore on rainy days to protect my penny loafers and Mary Janes. Goodbye, golden Victrola I pressed my ear to as my mother played her 78s and 33 LPs. George and Ira Gershwin's Porgy and Bess, Duke Ellington's Black, Brown, and Beige. Goodbye to my father's carved ebony chess set. Goodbye, uncles home from the war, smoking Pall Malls and Lucky Strikes. Goodbye, Grandpa Bill, who smoothed the crease of his gray felt fedora with nails buffed and trimmed. Goodbye to Grandpa Roy, who dove off a high platform when the circus came to town. Helped his mom in the bakery after his father abandoned them. Goodbye to my great Aunt Bertha, who passed along quilts dating back to the Civil War. Goodbye, Delaplaine boys, who joined the Union Army and never returned, though we have a few brass buttons from a uniform. Goodbye to the Indian arrowheads they found along the riverbank. Goodbye to the Algonquian tribes who named the river above the falls Cohongaruton, honking geese. And south of the falls, Patawomac, river of swans. Goodbye to words they traded in, now forgotten, forbidden, no one wrote them down. Goodbye, glaciers that smoothed the rocks at Great Falls, leaving tiny white shells in the crevices and folds. Thank you. Thank you for your listening. I turn it over to Yeva.
Thank you so much, Rocky. That was fun. And
That was fun.
we'll have more fun as we go along. I'm so happy to be here today. And I want to thank Nancy, as well as Sigrid and Irene and Eric and all the friends who are here today as well. I am going to, when I often play, and we're gonna have something special today, I play and do my poems together. So I will be doing that today. I liken it to a meal, an offering of poetry and music. Today we have a short time, so this is somewhat of an appetizer type meal. And I have a variety of things to offer you today. And I thought of it sort of like gado-gado, if you're familiar with gado-gado, that dish. A little of this, a little of that. So mostly poems, a little music, and a little smattering of banter to go with it. My final poem, I'm so honored. Rocky will read my poem and I get to play with my own poem, which is really fun. So I will start with music and then go into the poems. The first poem is Diasporic Loops. I started out with cornrows and beads. I ended up with a short, nappy afro. I started out knowing snapdragons, forsythia, maple, and crab apple trees. I ended up knowing agapanthus, California poppies, eucalyptus, and redwoods. I started out hip hop dancing in the gay club scene. I ended up swimming in the slow lane at the piscine. I started out reading Wind in the Willows and One Fish, Two Fish, Red Fish, Blue Fish. I ended up reading Bastard Out of Carolina and Who Fears Death. I started out like Nina Simone, a classically trained musician. I ended up studying off and on with jazz flutist Gerald Beckett. I started out being called a gay man in a lesbian's body. I ended up calling myself a queer lesbian. I started out believing all of my ancestors were from Africa via Alabama. I ended up learning some were Confederate soldiers and Native Americans. I started out making a mean matzo ball soup. I ended up making a mean mujatara. I started out with a crush on Craig Oliver. I ended up with a crush on Maria Hinojosa. I started out a feminist and a pacifist. I ended up a pacifist and a feminist. I started out saying "eet smakelijk" before meals. I ended up saying "foi ótimo, muito obrigada" after meals. I started out an agnostic, Unitarian Universalist searching for truth. I ended up a humanistic Jew still searching. I started out full of dreams. I ended up like any poet deep in the valley that descends beyond late middle age with so much to say, but running out of time. The next poem I'm going to do is just a little poem. I wanted to give you some variety today. And lately, given all that's going on, it's been really hard to sleep at night. So this poem is called Insomnia Mulch. I unfurl a mahogany stamen who pads her way to the bathroom to fulfill a middle-aged woman's nightly rites. Empty, I climb up to my bed, not soiled, and sink deep into my petal sheets and enfold my blanket leaves around me. I lay my flower head back and hum a prayer for sleep's return. And I think I will play a little bit more music and then we'll have a couple more poems. This next poem is a recent one and just fun for me. I hope you enjoy it. I think it will explain itself as I read it. Crone Crush. I want to drink your dry skin in, feel your white hair waterfall next to my own onyx pond, gradually transformed by respectable gray streaks. Your unshorn silver tresses, kinky, unruly, curly, sleek, wavy, or spiky, sparkle in the sunlight. You complain of hot flashes and body aches, as if to warn me off your aging nooks and crannies. Little do you know, I've always yearned for the crinkles and wrinkles of skin. Bony changes in hand and spine tantalize rather than repel. I want to intertwine my body with yours and delight in the momentary lessening of pain with a woman who can appreciate desire, my longtime longing. I want to explore zones left dormant and still splash in that fountain of hot lust, crowned now with Argentine threads. No, you don't put me off. I am the moth drawn to your white hot flame. And I think, as Sigrid mentioned, I was really honored to have a poem selected for Poem of the Day at the San Francisco Public Library by the Poet Laureate, whom I really admire. It's wonderful. So I'm going to read you that poem today, and you can find it at the San Francisco Public Library website if you wanted to read it yourself. It's called Sister from Another Planet, Birth of a Post-Analog Poet. When I at last succumbed, it was out of necessity, as the world was supposed to open up, and I would have to remain isolated for an extended period in my immunocompromised cocoon. I'm sure you understand why I had to break down and dive into the river of electrons, bobbing and dodging posts and blogs carried by the current. I've relied on the younger generation to teach me to navigate the rapids and shallow eddies. What I hadn't realized was how painful this birth process would be. I'm squeezed between coveting privacy and the threat of annihilation. All the sandy beaches and docks have been removed, leaving only one magic internet kayak accessible solely by web. Perhaps they are flushing out the last of the Black and brown people from our shelters in space. We who've been on the downside of the digital divide. I relinquish handshakes, hugs, and full face smiles, which slip like slick otters from my grasp as I am squeezed through the social media birth canal into this intra-pandemic world. And I think now I'm going to call on Rocky to assist me with the last poem, which is called Boom Boom. And I will, are you ready, Rocky? This is going to be
ready.
This is a world premiere for this poem. It's fun.
Boom, boom. Heartbeat. Every dream I never let extinguish. Ventricular sac. My family. From carotid blood flow to mitral valve, that crush on the cute librarian still beats under the aortic arch. The right atrium is where I wear my rose-colored glasses, and there are bits of my sleeve plastered all over the pericardium. Despite a septum There's a softness to the whole enterprise. Electrical impulses keep that tricuspid valve flapping, even with the small plaques that softly push me toward the cliff of death. From the superior vena cava all the way to the apex, I always feel the love, the love, the love, the love.
Thank you, Rocky, and thank you, everyone. And now we will pass the poetic torch on to Nancy.
Hey, thank you, everybody. This is just such fun. I'm fascinated always when we read as a group how each one of us just shows up in our own way. And when I was getting ready for this, I felt the smoke and the COVID and every day a new injustice to fight. I was drawn to really my earliest poems, much quieter, reflective, not always maybe as upbeat, but here we go. This one is the first poem that I ever had published in a print journal, and it's called Bear Witness. A polygamy of color. The marsh weds every shade of green. Winds flip the reeds, lavender to silver. A great blue heron, barely visible in the crepey mist, stands witness. Black waters ruffle her legs. I try to match her stillness. Despite my breath-caught step, she spooks into flight, a dirigible unmooring. Her legs trail like kite string. Divining rod sure, she threads through branches, lands high in a Douglas fir. She's now a blue-gray splotch against a cover of green. Winds die down. The reeds stiffen. I watch as long as I can bear, store up the colors, her graceful soar, my own impatience. My amazing mother, whom some of you know, lived to almost 100 alone in her home in Oakland. I always say I'm glad she lived long enough for us to work out our complicated relationship. This poem comes from, as the title will say, a week at the Grand Canyon South Rim with my 90-year-old mother. And I start with an epigram from Rilke. I still don't know if I am a falcon or a storm or a great song. Gravel skids wordless into the abyss where the chocolate dark Colorado shoves the cliffs. 6 comings and goings of the Pacific, a fossil trace and shards of shell. Mother and daughter, we know about wearing down, about patterns, fingernails scraped in bedrock. We stroll the rim, slow into a ritual, meals, naps, bed by 9. Live with the distance. Cottonwoods blink green, relieving the sun-blasted rock. Silence wraps us, but we do not say. The condors come, winging us with cool shadows, stripping away the last raw bits from what is already dead. The two of us pick at imperfections as if we could whittle each other down to clean bone. I grew up in New England, where summer is a bit more precious than here in California. And the question that popped into my head of this title took me back. The question is, does summer have a music? Girl bumps bareback on horses, a pounding Rachmaninoff of hoofs. Slaps and hisses, the blue-gray Atlantic keeps time on a pebbled shore. Summer is jazz leaping into unexpected crannies, the squirt and slurp of a sun-warmed tomato, staccato prick of a blackberry thorn. Fingers should play a dulcimer in a swath of meadow and wild asters, linger on skin, cricket nights, a lover's moan. Fall winds sigh around the edges. Don't let the music stop. Next week is the 3rd anniversary of my next youngest brother's death, and I want you to hear just a little about him. Deadhead the rhododendrons, says my brother, absently rubbing his carpenter hands. Always cold now. He'll die before the month is out. For hours, I'm tending, touching, not my brother in the house asleep, not my brother too busy dying to let me visit, but scores of bushes by the patio, the barn, around every shingled corner of his old house. I missed their lavender, fuchsia, white, while he was still up and about. The bloom this afternoon sucked into brown splotches huddled in the crotch of a branch. I stoop and stretch down to the ground, deep into the center, no petals, only the sprong of filaments, empty as fingers that just let go. Snap them at their source. What's left? A cream-colored indent, round as a cervix. Baby green lurks, new sepals. How dare they sprout into a world without him? This one is called Move, a topic many of us older folk have to confront. We faced it recently about leaving a country house on the peninsula to a high-rise in San Francisco. Move, the smart thing to do, everyone says, while you're still able. Give up the wide-eyed home on the hill, multiple stories, aging appliances. Remember Grandma crawling up her steep stairs, house dress hiked above her knees? Is that how you want to end up? Sad, this morning, the torn wing of the wren bashed to death against the pane. You leave one brown feather, slim token on the stone. Flex your biceps, your two strong arms still flying, not ready yet to move to the city high-rise perched below the clouds. Yes, elevators whisk you up, but if a bird hit that window, you'd never find the feather, the bit of gristle where it detached. Living so far from the earth, how would you learn to die? And I think I've got just a minute more, and I decided to change the tone and the rhythm, not necessarily more upbeat, but a more recent piece about who I am in our culture. It's called Color Myself. Not only cyclist, poet, grandmother of 5, but white. How I resist coloring myself. Snow-masked, police glare white, fish-bellied, picket fence white. It doesn't matter if I'm also Selma Marcher, brown son's mother. Always white, white's only, redlining white, him hallowed, home-schooled white. Okay, we shall overcome, swear. I am still over talking, line cutting, to home owning, white. Tree hugger, purse hugger, street crosser, white. Despite red diaper, Alzheimer father, dead brother, mom playing Brahms. I am house alarmer, organic farmer, beachcomber, white. Slave owning, clear cutting, Indian cheating, white. Every day I rush about in charge, traffic jam, lunch line, library fine, wife, pretending I'm invisible, individual. Seems simple, but how often I blind myself, refuse to see white, insist on poet, cyclist, grandmother of 5. Thank you all. And just 1 second here, I'm going to get this out of my way and welcome us to our 3-part conversation that we're at 11:15, so we'll perhaps be crisp and then move on to your questions. So Rocky is going to start us off. You're muted, Rockster.
Okay. So this portion is about writing in the second half of life, and I'm going to direct my question first to Yeva and then to Nancy, and then I'll chime in. At what age did you come to writing, and what brought you to it?
I think that's a wonderful question. I can't really remember the true age I came to writing. Was early. My father was a poet as well, and I used to write. And I had one of those sad events that unfortunately are too common. A teacher who was very, very negative when I was in high school told me my writing was terrible, and it shut me up for over 30 years. So I didn't write at all or nothing, but I had a friend who got me started at the age of 49. And she gave me this incredible gift. Some of you may know her, Dawn McGuire. She's a local poet, physician, and she's one of my first mentors. And she allowed me to practice with her by writing a poem a day and sending it to her. And that's what got me started at 49. So I'll keep it crisp and leave it at that. And
thank you. Thank you. Nancy, same question. Do you want to hear it again?
No, it's fine. I'm 77. I never wrote anything till my 50s, never even took a college course in English. I think I came to poetry because I hated my mother and loved her and feared her and wanted her. And so I was in therapy and personal growth groups and experiential learning, explorations into shamanism and women's spirituality, and they were all immersing myself in image and dream. And I put some of it into words, and somebody said that was poetry. And I got good response, so I kept on and always felt closer to myself and surprised myself with what I learned by just falling into writing. And that's kept me going now for 20 years of it. So that's how I started.
So I'll ask myself the same question. I think I have to credit my mom, but it wasn't the part of me that hated her. It was the part of me that really appreciated her because she gave me my first book of poetry. It was an illustrated book. I loved the poems. She also enrolled me in a modern dance class that was up the hill from where we lived. And the modern dance teacher said, find a poem, pick a poem and dance to it. So because of my mom, I fell in love with poetry and let it live in me in a very powerful way. I only wrote one poem when I was young, when I was 15, put it in a drawer and didn't have the courage to even think about starting again till I was in my mid-30s. And we had a a local writer center, and I found a teacher there. Sounds like I had a mentor like you, Yeva. My first teacher, Maxine Clare, some of you may know her work. She was very forgiving. She was very generous. She really gave me permission as a beginner to express myself and overcome the inner critic, because like you, that can stifle the best of us. So it took me a long time to find my self-authority, and like Nancy, a lot of inner work and encouragement, but finding someone to give you that encouragement made all the difference.
Thank you, Rocky. That's fun. Oop, do you all hear a little echo? I heard just a bit. Okay. Now our next question, I love how our answers sort of interweave and intertwine in a similar way to some of our themes and moods and language in our poems. It's been so pleasurable today. Our second question is, what role does being a poet play in your life right now? And I will turn it over to Nancy to answer that question first.
Okay. Well, this is partially from the first question too. I think for the last 20 years, it's really been a learning edge, the challenge and a beacon drawing me to writing groups, which then became friendship circles, to teachers, especially Jeffrey Levine, I credit, and workshops, which slowly honed a craft and expanded who I knew. It took me 20 years to say I was a poet, to begin to submit to journals and maybe someday a book. But it's always energized me. Just the act of writing is more important than getting anything published. So is that the question? Did I answer it?
Yeah.
Yes, that was fantastic. Now we're going to turn it over to Rocky to answer that question.
I think my answer is similar to yours, Nancy, that that the role of being a quote unquote poet is the friends that you meet, the associations that you build. I feel so blessed to have other poets in my life who challenge me, surprise me, delight me, and push me to do better and to go beyond the known world, to go beyond my limitations. So I would say the role that poetry has played is bringing me into a wider and wider circle of very creative and wonderful human beings.
Really good.
How about you, Yeva?
Thank you, Rocky. Yeah, I'll let you all know. To tie into what I said previously, Dawn got me started, one poem a day. I did this with her for 9 months, and she's extremely busy, like doing many things. So I finally said, I think I can go on my own. So I've been at this practice. I consider it more of a practice. It's been 5.5 years now. I finally started putting poems in for publishing them, and that is a whole nother difficult world, but it is what it is. I don't let it stop me from writing my poems, which is really good. But then this pandemic happens, and I am immune compromised and have multiple risk factors for COVID-19. So I am isolated away from anyone. I haven't, although except for my patients, because I'm a physician. So with the patients, I'm all suited up, and those are the only people I've touched in the last 6 months, and no one's touched me. So right now, the role of poetry, I'm involved because this happened to all of us on the planet. There are all these Zoom poetry communities that have sprung up, and I credit them and I say it to them weekly, and some of them I meet every week, some are every 2 weeks, some are once a month. They are keeping me alive. It's keeping me alive to share in the creative process. I have writing groups, I have sharing groups, I have reading groups that go to open mics, and it just keeps me connected. And to hear the poems and to make poems with people and to have poetry teachers come, it's just fantastic. So we are so lucky here in the Bay Area. I'm thrilled that we have, but now the Bay Area is connecting with the plant. We have people from one of my last meetings, somebody's from Australia, the Netherlands, the Philippines, all over the world. So it's connecting the world, this poetry thing. It's wonderful. So I will pass the torch over to Nancy now for our final question.
Our last question is, how does your voice as an older poet come out, serve you? And I don't know, I don't have the question right in front of me, I'm sorry, but that's close enough, I hope, Rocky, for you to take us off.
A lot of my poems are elegies. They're ways of saying goodbye to people who have died, friends and family members who have died, or animals that are no longer on the planet. So I think at 67, I'm looking back more than I'm looking ahead, and I'm thinking more and more about what do I want to do with my one wild and precious life, as Mary Oliver says, and what do I want to say before I leave, and what do I want to leave behind? And when I was younger, I wasn't really so concerned about those things, but they're more and more in my concern now. How about you, Yeva?
I'm so glad you brought that up. I will, very short. My father, as I mentioned, wrote poetry and really encouraged me when I was young. But he had a whole other career, and that was just his fun thing to do. There was a small collection to our church that has a couple, maybe 3, 4 of his poems, and he died, several decades ago, and we lost his papers, and I only have 3 or 4 of his poems. So what is driving me is I hope to publish at least 1 manuscript of poems before I'm gone, so that I can leave it for my children so they have something to read. It's so hard to, an actual poet's real stuff, all these papers, there's like, those are not the poems, those are all the drafts, all the stuff we have. So that is really where, but given that, it's such a motivating thing for me that everything else that has to go into it, I love being an older poet. Some of the groups I am a part of, they are much younger people. Like I could be their mother or even grandmother, a young grandmother. I'm now 55. That they don't remember a time when people could walk outside without a cell phone on their body, or just like, it's the old days what I grew up with. So it's fascinating. Being older gives me the confidence to just do, I'm out there. It doesn't really matter. I already went to school. I already got the whatever grade I was going to get. It doesn't really matter anymore, because I'm aware the time we have left is limited. It's very precious, and I use it. So that helps me really participate, and I think it gives other people that opportunity to participate. Some people hold back. Some of the most brilliant poets I've seen, they're so shy, it's hard to share. So I'm an unusual extrovert poet, and I like doing it. As an older one, I could do it. Younger, I might not have had, the chutzpah to do this, so I do it.
That I'm going to piggyback right on it, because I think as an older poet, an older woman, the themes are different, that I like to write about aging bodies and death and dying and staying up to date with the internet and the new things and the retrospective angle from a long life, and speaking out on current events from a different historical perspective. But I think as an older voice, the bigger the curiosity, the surprise for people in 50 to 100 who are writing, has a very different tone than the MFA grads and the 20-year-olds. And so I think we have a really important place in the arena of poetry and of writing in general. And, we're a voice that needs to be heard and that needs to get in the mix. So it's been great to be. Ashby Village are definitely people in the mix. And I know we're at almost 11:30. So I want to give it back to Sigrid and to all of you to manage the way you like to at the Village, but been wonderful being with Rocky and Yeva and all of you who are here today. So.
Just let me say thank you so much, Nancy and Rocky and Yeva, for that wonderful, wonderful event, and for treating us with your poems and with your insight. That was really wonderful. So we have a few questions that were put down on in the chat, and I also want to say to Nancy, Yeva, and Rocky, there are lots of comments actually from the participants in the chat box. So if you want to check them out, I mean, you know, there are lots of them, but there are a couple of questions, and the first question there is, have you ever found yourself pressured inwardly or outwardly to hide any of your poetry from your loved ones?
Yes.
All three, yes.
Yeah.
I'll start in. I had a poem about family members, my siblings. And I felt that it touched on very sensitive material. And I was in a big struggle, but eventually I thought the right thing to do was ask their permission. And I said sometimes a poem, it's not like a newspaper article, truth in that sense, but that the sense of the poem was trying to get at the truth. And would they be willing to have this poem go out into the world? So it was very important to me. It felt like the ethically right thing to do to ask their permission. And they gave me permission. And so I published two what I call sensitive poems about my early family life, but it was a long struggle for me to know what was the right action before I either submitted the poems for a publication or eventually for my book. But it was a struggle. It was definitely a struggle.
I think I would just say quickly that I have a lot of poems now, so I write them. And then some poems are for sharing widely to the public. Some poems I write and I have personal poems that are just for that individual I share with one person. There are always, whenever you write about something, we all have our own perspectives also. My mother died about 4 years ago, and I learned, we're very close family, I'm very close to my mother, and then my sister and I, you know, when people are stressed or there's certain topics, we had our visions of who our mother was are like very different, and who knew, you know, but then I realized, well, that was her mother and this is my mother, and both were correct. And that we all have our own vision. So I just try to honor the truth of what I feel and what I write. And I try to honor people and my intentions are never to harm. And then with that, then you have the bravery of, if it's a poem that needs to be out there, you put something out that is true and without intention of harm. And then you take responsibility for how people react to it. And that's my quickie. I'll turn it over to Nancy on that one.
Well, I agree that I have some poems that I write because I have to get them out of myself onto the page so I can sift through the experience. And I sort of self-select whether I put them into any kind of in the world or not. But I have found that when I share, perhaps in a smaller group, some of these very raw poems, of course, other people really respond and it opens a door for others. So I'm always in a mix of what is ethical and what is useful to other people. And sometimes I'm kind of oblivious and put something out there and then get the blowback. And other times I have several poems that have never left my computer. But I think all of us who begin to try to look back and do whole life histories, draw from your own memoir experience, this is a question that comes up all the time about what to pick and choose and what to say when people are still alive, etc.
There was a follow-up question to this one. Are your family and non-poet friends supportive?
Definitely. I've gotten a lot of support from family and friends. They're thrilled. They're thrilled.
Yeah.
Yeva?
I have some family members who are less interested than others, or who think I'm just crazy and sort of write me off, but I get enough support.
I would say, yes, family and friends are supportive. But I love family and friends. I have a big family and I have a lot of friends. So my family initially, because I'm relatively new to this, it was like really new, and they would come and make these supreme efforts. Readings used to be small, obscure things at funny times and hard to get out of work and do. And but now that I'm doing more and more, and it's now more recognized and more supported in a different way. Like, that's what I do. And they don't always have to come to because they just come when they truly want to, and there's no obligation. And I think that's a true way of supporting. So I just do what I do, and they come when they come, and it's really fun. Some friends are the same. They're not really into poetry. They come a couple times, you know. Some are getting into it, and they come and they listen. It's like, hear other poets. So I have somebody who's going to wake up at 3 a.m. in London to just try to hear a reading today. So it's very sweet, you know. So yes, the answer is yes.
Yeah, but there is another question actually for you. I think you mentioned that, and it's from a fellow woman poet, and she would like to know, could you please recommend the Zoom poetry groups? I think you mentioned that, right? Yeah.
Okay. So I'll just be quick. If you're interested in open mic, if you write poems and you want to share, I highly recommend the Museum of the African Diaspora. It's open to everyone. It's really fun. And that is every 2 weeks on Thursday evenings. There's my first group that's also, well, it's that one, I'm not sure, they need to know you. So it's called Voz Sin Tinta, though. You could try Voz, V-O-Z, Sin Tinta, S-I-N-T-I-N-T-A. It's a multicultural, multilingual poetry open mic. I think if you email them, they will let you in. Nomadic Press has an open mic every Friday evening. Everyone is welcome, and that is fantastic. It's 6 o'clock. It's really good. So those are some of the open mics. Bird and Beckett Bookstore, which is in San Francisco, just started doing things online. So there's a ton of stuff going on. I looked up, coming up, we're going to have Litquake is coming up next month. A ton of things are going on. Yep. Then in terms of generative stuff, the groups I'm involved in are most often BIPOC groups, Black, Indigenous, people of color groups. And since the George Floyd thing, a group has started just for Black only poets, which is amazing. It's once a month. All the teachers, all the participants, it's very intense and really amazing. You start one place and then you I'm so new to the social media, like literally in July. So I have a website, but it doesn't have it. Like, you can't find all this stuff, but just start in one place. Marin Poetry Center has a ton of events. I would check Marin Poetry Center. There's a Berkeley Poetry Festival coming up. There's a San Jose group that I haven't been to yet. I keep meeting people from there.
Yeah,
really
Poetry
cool.
Center, San Jose, yeah.
Right, they're doing a lot of stuff down there. And now everything's online. And poets I meet, there's apparently a Parisian group that's fantastic, and people come from all over the world. I haven't been able to find that one yet. So just start one place, and then if you like those poems, you can put in the chat and people will mention other stuff. But I hope that's enough to give you a taste, but there's a ton out there. And yeah, go to the Marin Poetry Center just to start looking, and then, other places too. Libraries too.
So there's one more question, and that's the last question now. And it says, Nancy said, it took me 20 years to call myself a poet. Can each of you recall a time when you first really, really felt your empowering poetic self? Were you writing, reading, or listening? Nancy, maybe you start this one.
Yeah, I think it was a combination of, I had a weekly poetry group. It's now disbanding, but we met for 20 years. And it was in that very supportive setting where when I first got a little bit published here or there, whatever, they would keep kind of reinforcing that kind of means you're a poet. And I think it was actually in doing open mic readings and standing up with other poets and saying, oh, it's okay, I can stand up here. I stopped comparing myself to others so much and began to say, oh, I'm beginning to see how I write. And that is, I think, more than anything, what made me say, all right, I'm my kind of poet, I'm me, this is my voice, so I can call myself a poet. I don't have to be Mary Oliver or Billy Collins or, you know, I can just, I'm doing it and I've been doing it a long time, so why not use the name? But it really was a big issue. And just to get the words out of my mouth, it was as hard as saying I'm white.
Rocky, you?
I think like Nancy, when I stopped comparing myself to others, I have a friend who's a jazz musician, and he invited me to read along with a 4-piece jazz combo, and I could listen to the jazz and read, and we would go back and forth. And that was my dream. You know, that was my lifelong dream, to have music and words together. And there was something about the music that relaxed me and brought me fully present. And I felt like you, Nancy, that I didn't have to, it wasn't about measuring up to someone else's yardstick. It was about being fully present and being in the moment. And that was just a great moment for me. And that's why I wanted to have Yeva play with me. There's just the sense of play. When it's playful and it's enjoyable, that's when I feel my best poetic self.
I jump in right quick and say that when I met Rocky, I didn't call myself a poet. It was my first workshop that I got into. And then I just called myself a person who wrote poems. I wrote poems, but I wasn't a poet, not like the real people. And then at some point after that, that was about 3 years ago we met, someone asked me to be a featured poet. When I was open mics really helped, but I was still a person who wrote poems, and I love to do open mics, and it's fun, and you see who you like. It's just totally fun to go into open mics. But when they asked me to be featured, I had to write the bio, and then when you write the bio, you have to say something, and you're a poetry feature. So that's when I started doing it. And once I do that, I take ownership of what I was like, oh, I am a poet. The more I wrote it, the more it's true, I am. And so it's fine, you know. For a while I was like, I don't have a book, like all my friends are writing books and everything. I was like, you don't need a book, you can just be the poet. You don't have to have a book, you don't have to be published, you don't have to do it. You are the thing. You are that flavor of ice cream already. So that's it.
One last thing for Nancy. Actually, one of the participants asked, I sent a private message to Nancy, which she hasn't seen, I think. I would like to share her poem on whiteness with my white identity group, but missed any reference to where to find it.
I'd be delighted to have anybody use that poem. And let's see. Actually, it's been published in a journal called Lucky Jefferson. And if you Google my name or the name of that poem, I think you'll get taken to it. Otherwise, you can send, I'll send it to you if you send me a message through, I don't know what's the best way to do that, but I can give Sigrid you have my email, Sigrid, you can pass it on, whatever's ethical there. But does that help? but I have another friend who runs some groups who's been using that poem, and I'm happy for that.
Very good. I think we are at the end of our event, but there's one comment I would like to read because that really ends it on a really nice note. It says here, "Thank you. This was such a special lift for me, much needed today." And I absolutely concur. It was a really wonderful and really, uplifting event. Thank you so much. I mean, everybody, thank you again, Yeva and Nancy and Rocky, and also thank you to all the participants today.
Thanks very much, everyone, for coming.
Thank you. And I'll play you a little music to say goodbye.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks again. Thank you.